All right, so I want to welcome everybody to our lockdown learning for Friday, May 8th, 2020. Our guest today is one of my oldest friends in the world. He was my junior and senior year college roommate, was somebody who I have been very close with for a long time. And he's going to tell you a little bit of the story himself, but it's been great to watch his business grow and watch his family and everything else over the last 20 years. So Cody Friesen is founder and CEO of Zero Mass Water, and he is the material science engineer. I am the English major, so I'm going to allow Cody to explain exactly what it is. But you know, when people ask me who are the most impressive people you've ever met, Cody's name is generally at the top of the list for me. We lived together for a couple of years. It was us and one other roommate our junior year, and then for many reasons it was just us the next year. And it was interesting. We had this really let's just say not amazing apartment in Tempe, Arizona, on the Tempe Mesa line back in 1998 to 2000, and we had some interesting neighbors, and it was just just put it in perspective. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment with utilities included for, I think our rent was $800 a month.
Running pretty rich there.
Yeah, it was pretty scary. It was I would come home and we had the center point. Cody and I caught up a little bit yesterday, and there's the center point in the apartment that was really literally the center of the apartment. On one wall, we had a big whiteboard up that was kind of a dry erase material that we had nailed into the wall. And then right next to that, it connected like this to some sliding glass doors. And I would come home from playing music or a gig or a class, and I would have I would walk in and it would look like a scene from A Beautiful Mind, where Cody was just creating equations onto these whiteboards with dry erase markers and everything else. And I couldn't tell if he was just pretending to be smart or if he really was. But I know, I'm just kidding. I knew he really was. So Cody, can you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us maybe a little of your background, and then what is Zero Mass Water?
Yeah, sure. So Adam, thanks for having me on, and looking forward to spending this hour. I grew up in Arizona. You grew up in Atlanta, and then we converged in Tempe. I grew up in a little town, what used to be a little town called Gilbert, and in the middle of a cotton field. My dad built custom homes for a living, and so spent a lot of time messing around out in the desert, and learned work ethic from my dad, and as doing carpentry while I was a teenager. Ended up at ASU because it's what I could afford, and ended up.
We had that in common too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Ended up my first before I lived with Adam, I had a roommate, a female roommate, who was not a romantic roommate, but just a roommate who was literally insane, and so. It was a pretty big step up getting to move in with Adam, who was only figuratively and mildly insane, and we were insane in many similar but many different ways, which made for a really dynamic time together. So as Adam was talking about, we had the whiteboard, and it had equations on it, but then it had quotes from Adam's favorite authors at the time, and so it was sort of Dead Poet Society meets Big Bang Theory, and so pretty different groups of friends and different folks. So that was really kind of a fun experience. I think we would converge at about 2 a.m. on the Taco Bell run, if I remember correctly. To double down on Adam's point about the quality apartment, in the same night, this is not made up, in the same night, a pipe burst in Adam's room, flooding the entire apartment, resulting in multi-months of horrible situation with respect to trying to figure out how to not have a hole through to the next apartment. That exact same night, at the exact same time, my pickup truck, which was right outside, was stolen and discovered a month later, completely taken apart. But what was cool about, looking back on it,
that wasn't the only time your truck was broken into, right?
No. But what makes it special is that it happened at the same time that the apartment was flooding.
Yeah, at the time I was driving a 1990 Chevy conversion van, so I think people stayed away from that out of fear of what they might find in it.
Was it also? Do I remember that it was? I was going to say pink, but it was more like
mauve.
sand.
It was mauve.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure what that is, but basically,
it was, so Cody was pink.
The same color as your shirt. So then after ASU, I headed off to go do a PhD at MIT, and so moved up to Cambridge and Boston, and Adam headed off to Maryland, and sort of we lived our sort of hard knocks, kind of getting beat up by the world for a few years, kind of getting honed before we started our businesses. Then I came back to Arizona as a professor of material science in 2004. Spun out a battery company in 2007 called Fluidic Energy, took that global, and then started this company, Zero Mass Water, in 2014, at the end of 2014. Zero Mass Water, what we do is we basically take what solar did for electricity, and we do that for water. So we take sunlight and air only into what we call hydro panels. So they look like kind of thicker than normal solar panels. And we take sunlight and air in, and we produce perfect water. And we can do that basically anywhere on the planet. We're now installed in over 45 countries, and from applications of like 1 or 2 panels at a home, all the way up to thousands of panels in arrays for whole communities. And so think about the power of what solar does in terms of providing renewable energy without any feedstock, without having to pump fuel in and providing electricity to, whether it's at your home or to whole cities. We can now do that in water. So now imagine the ability to just plunk down an artesian well anywhere on the planet, and think about the power of that and what that does. Just to give you like one metric to really drive it home, every single day, over 200 million hours are spent fetching water by women and girls every day globally. Think about the productivity and the value and the ability for them to get education and so on if they weren't fetching that water. We have the ability today to completely offset that, all the way up to right here on my roof. I've got 2 panels, and it's what I drink, my dogs drink, the family drinks, etc.
I was typing that note in the YouTube. So every day, 200 million hours are spent fetching water by women and girls.
Yep. And on the African continent alone, it's about 40 billion hours a year. People talk about, you'll hear people say things like, oh, wars in the future will be fought over water. What that belies is that almost all wars to date have been at their root fought over water, right? The Tigris and Euphrates rivers that connect Iran and Iraq, the 1980s wars there, the Syria refugee crisis, and all the stuff going on around that was initiated by a 2006 drought that caused 50 million livestock in the country of Syria to die, and 1.5 million farmers to move into the city during a recession, which caused a massive conflagration that then resulted in a civil war that then resulted in all the other stuff going on there. So, water stress is a major thing. There's a reason why in the tropics, there's a lot less war going on than places that are more water stressed. There's a direct 1-1 correlation.
That's interesting. I'm going to share a picture of what an array looks like. Can you kind of detail what this is?
Yeah, so you're looking at actually an array at a resort on Kangaroo Island in Australia. And each one of those panels is a source hydro panel. And so that's an array of, it looks like you can see 10 of them or so. There may be a few more rows behind that. And so that array is collecting and producing, and even in a relatively dry place like Australia, the drinking water for that resort. So rather than shipping in bottled water and all that wasted plastic, 500 billion liters of bottled water are sold globally every year. It's crazy the amount of water that is sold in plastic. And it's not usually for eco resorts. Over 95% of that market is all about people in more modest economies looking to supply their families with water they believe is at least sterile in that package.
And then what happens to that water while it sits in plastic in the heat and the cold and everything else over 3 years, right?
Yeah, so all the the antimony, which is a catalyst, the toluene, et cetera, all the sort of organics that get into that water. That's why you don't want to drink from bottled water that's been sitting in your car. Only about 7% of all PET is ever recycled. Even if you put it in the recycle bin, often it just goes to the landfill because nobody can make money on recycling PET, which is why there's the Pacific garbage patch, which is, obviously, what ends up on the beaches in Bali and all that stuff is some, soda bottle that was thrown away in San Diego.
So can you walk through a really dumbed down version of how it goes? The water's in the air, the sunlight hits the hydro panel, and it comes out of a tap.
Yeah, so everybody is familiar with, like, when you're in a really humid place, how oppressive that humidity is. But even in the desert, like here in Arizona, there's a heck of a lot of water vapor in the air. In the lowest part of the atmosphere, what's called the troposphere, there's over 3,500 cubic miles. If you were to condense all the water vapor in that lower part of the atmosphere, 3,500 cubic miles of water in the air globally. That's more than 6 times the volume of all the rivers on the planet. And it gets cycled through the air every 7 days, so every week. So you're basically, talk about a renewable resource. So now you have that water vapor. Now imagine like sugar in a sugar bowl. Imagine at home when you leave your lid off the sugar bowl and you think about that sugar getting a little bit clumpy. The sugar does that because it's because of its nature, it's absorbing the water vapor in the air. And the sciencey word there is that the sugar is hygroscopic with a G, hygroscopic, which is Greek for water vapor, and it likes water vapor, hygroscopic. And so now imagine a nanostructured material that does that really fast. And then we can use the energy of the sun to respire that water vapor back off. And so we can use materials to passively concentrate water vapor and then use the power of the sun to produce a condensable vapor basically anywhere on the planet. That's how it works. And so we end up with basically distilled water, so like a clean slate. And then we put that through a mineral block, so we end up with magnesium and calcium added. And then you have water that's basically as nice as the finest premium brands of bottled water, but without the waste, without the plastic, and of course at much lower cost. And in a way that is the only sustainable bottled water you've ever had, and or water you've ever had. And for the first time, the only water you've had that wasn't extracted. So in a lot of cases, you're talking about, water being extracted out of the ground or off of a river. So really powerful conception, or sort of bringing, again, that kind of concept of renewables to water.
So actually, I was going to wait for questions, but there's a really great question from Alicia. So I'm gonna unmute her and let her ask it because it's directly related to what you just said. So you're unmuted.
Okay. So say everyone in the earth is using this product and they're all taking that air from taking the water from the air, sorry.
Yeah.
Would that affect the environment at all, like the weather or like clouds or anything?
It's a super good question. And so it actually turns out that the math is that if every single person on the planet was getting their drinking water from source, it'd be about 1 part in 100 million of all of the water vapor in there, and that's replenished again every week. So there's no way to have the impact. And even in the local environment, if you have a big array, right, you can't reduce the relative humidity locally because there's so much what's called passive convection, that the air is always moving. And so it's a really good question because your intuition is, well, I can't feel the water, I can't see the water vapor, so how much could there really be? Well, remember that the surface of our planet, 70% of it is water, right? The oceans. And so it's just this constant flux of water vapor coming into the air. And so there's a lot of interesting kind of dynamics around that I won't go into, but yeah, super good question, Alicia. Alicia, right. Did I pronounce it correctly? Okay.
All right. So Cody, the first question that I'm going to get to here is, where'd the idea come from?
Yeah. So I wish I have to come up with the really crisp, entrepreneur visionary answer, which I don't have. I'll give you the kind of dorky long form answer, which is there's sort of this connection between what they call the energy, water, food nexus, right? There's this connection between energy, water, and food, and they interplay off one another. I've been in the renewable energy space my entire career, going back to the MIT days. And you see the power, like the literal and figurative. You see the impact of renewable energy. You see the power and impact in the world, in the emerging markets of batteries and being able to store energy. But that's just electricity, right? It's just like the ability to turn on a light. And then you see people that have that, they're still drinking water that makes them have diarrhea, right? And then at the same time, you see people who are extraordinarily wealthy in Berkeley and LA and Atlanta and whatever else, drinking, water that's very wasteful. And so you sort of start to say, wait a minute, water stress is a global issue. It's a human condition. Could we apply the principles from over here to here? And then what are the kind of definitions around that? What would it have to be? Well, it'd have to be infrastructure free, like renewables. It'd have to be disintermediated, meaning there's nobody between you and the thing, the resource. It would have to be done in a way that's fully renewable. And so that kind of started to define it. And then we basically kicked off a research project inside of my ASU research group, and built a highly cross-disciplinary team, computational fluid dynamicists, thermodynamicists, material scientists, chemists, and so on, to go and develop what became Source. So that's the shortest version I've got it to now. I will promise next time we do this, I'll have like a really pithy, like sharp answer for you that's like, oh yeah, I was out jogging and I saw the sweat drip off my brow. And at that moment, I thought, no, I'll come up with something.
We'll keep working on it, right?
Yep.
That's funny. So one of the things that we talk regularly about is if you're going to put real effort into something for an extended period of time. Now, y'all keep in mind, Cody was finished at MIT. When did you finish your PhD?
04.
So 04. So we're talking 16 years ago. Came back, worked at ASU as a professor, started and sold a battery company, and now is doing this for the last several years. If you're going to do something with the level of intensity that you do, how many miles do you fly last year?
I'm really bad about that, but I was on the road for probably 50-60% of the time. And like just in one trip last year, I hit 8 countries, 16 cities in 3 weeks. And that's, right. I do that twice a year. And then in between that, I do a bunch of stuff. And then just on the last trip I took was March 12th, and I was coming back from Bogota. So a lot.
Right, so you're on the road a lot. You're working like a maniac. You have already built and sold one company. So for you to put this level of effort in, we talk a lot about you got to have a strong why. So what's the why? What drives you?
Philosophically, it just comes down to if every person just left the planet just a tiny bit better than they found it, this world would be a phenomenal place, right? And I'm sort of just wired to, as you are, Adam, to like sort of anything that is a good thing I want to do more of. And so that's what drives. But it's also really fun to see, like you had that one picture up of the 2 little boys in Ecuador. Just awesome to see like, a kid walk up and get their first drink of water in their life that didn't make them sick, right? And
I remember you told me a story about a little girl that she had never had water before that she hadn't boiled. Right.
Yep. Yeah. And that's now, I think I sent you a picture of me sitting with all those girls along that line. Those are a bunch of Syrian refugee girls that are all orphans so they've lost everything. They lost their families, their country, came out of a war zone, found their way into Lebanon, and there they are. Yeah. And look at them. They could be a bunch of girls sitting in some place in Atlanta, right? Oh. And these are orphans that are all wearing donated clothing that had, some of them have shrapnel wounds and many other issues. And
yeah, they're around our kids' age.
Yeah, and now they're on that roof. There is an array of Source hydro panels, providing them good drinking water. They're north of Tripoli, so like right up near the Syrian border in Lebanon.
So you've had some experience working in Jordan as well, right?
Yep, quite a bit, yeah.
So can you talk about some of your Middle East desert experience and what the reaction has been to your product?
Yeah, so I think most people, some of you may be from the Middle East or from the Arab world more broadly. So you may be as familiar, or for those of you that are uninitiated, I think most of us sort of think about the Middle East from the point of view of like, oh yeah, that's where Iraq is, that's where Pakistan is, that's where, whatever. But it's actually a beautiful region where, beautiful culture, beautiful, a lot of people enjoy the food that comes out of that region, et cetera. It's the seat of most, the three of the big religions in the world. And, what's been really interesting and sort of integral to the building of this company is when we were very early on, I was serving on the Clinton Global Initiative in the Haiti Action Network. So we were dealing with issues related to the Haiti earthquake and serving on the Middle East Security Initiative. And through that process, I met King Abdullah, who's the king of Jordan, and told him about what I was thinking about starting in terms of zero mass water. 2 weeks after telling him that, flew to meet with him in his palace there in Jordan. That was that picture, the previous picture, and established the very first pilot. So we went from the university with just a few pilots around Arizona. The very next place that we put panels was in 8 sites across Jordan, from a place called Mafraq, which is right on the Syrian border, all the way down to the lowest point on earth, the Dead Sea in Kefrain, and then all the way down to the Red Sea in a place called Aqaba. And even those very first like minimum viability technology products were texting and a Gmail account data. So you're collecting data in real time. And then there's a dust storm in the Middle East called a haboob, which is like the wall of dust. So one day a wall of dust lifted up out of Saudi Arabia and came across Jordan, and we could see each one of our panels turn off as the sun was blocked out and then come back up. So think about the value of that data when you're learning. Middle East has been big for us. We're now, we've got several big projects in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in Jordan, in Lebanon. We're getting ready to do some stuff in Saudi Arabia. This is a place where, the culture is built around the seasonality of the water, because it's a natively dry place. And so they're both vulnerable to climate change, but also the ability to support those populations in a way that's productive, enables women to become educated and so on. So not fetching water while maintaining the Bedouin culture and a lot of those other things that are there. It's a beautiful thing.
So in the middle of the desert, driest places on earth, one hydro panel produces how much water?
Anywhere from 3 to 5 liters a day. So that's basically somewhere between 6 and 10 standard bottles of water a day from one panel.
From one panel.
Yeah. And so now obviously, again, you put as many together as you need. So like, for example, on my roof, I've got 2 hydro panels that produces all the water, all the drinking and cooking water for my family.
So in the house that we're building, we're going to put one on our roof because we live in a much more humid area.
Yep. And you're going to next gen product, so it'll even be better. I'm not going to say how much better yet publicly, but it's going to even be better.
I'm excited.
A lot better.
So in terms of the way that it works for, we've talked about what it does in impoverished nations. We've talked about what it does in places with no clean drinking water. Talk to me a little bit about your approach in terms of the general direct to consumer in an area like Atlanta or Phoenix, because you've got a pretty cool model where you can't get without giving.
Yeah. So anybody can go to zeromasswater.com and purchase hydro panels for their home. That's the most direct way to procure. And then of course,
unless they email you like I did.
Unless they email me. And which plenty of people do, or they send me like LinkedIn questions, whatever. And of course you can finance panels. We can also you can also get source water through some of our partners, which that'll be growing even more over time here. But when you buy source hydro panels, we basically take some of those proceeds and we go do work in other places. So we've done quite a bit of work outside the US, as you know. We've done quite a bit of work in West Virginia, in other places where the water table's been messed up either by coal mining or by other types of pollution, PFAS and other types of pollution. So, a big part of building this company, imagine the scale of the market here from the point of view of like everybody drinks water and everybody wants better water to drink. And what is super critical from my perspective is that the way that we ultimately arrive at our vision, which is perfecting water for every person, every place, is to retain that strong tie line, that ability to say, no, no, this one product serves everybody, from Adam Dorfman in Atlanta to somebody living much more modestly in Guayaquil, Ecuador, or in Samburu, Kenya.
So can you talk about the cost? Because I've got a couple questions. They're like, how does this compare to the cost of normal water acquisition? How does it compare to the cost of somebody who has blank whatever water delivered to their house by a truck? Because I get it from like that there's a huge difference in terms of carbon footprint and storage, but cost-wise, where does it go?
Yeah. So I'll kind of put that in two different ways. So if you were to, so the most expensive way to have source is just to have like 1 or 2 panels at your home, right? Because obviously we have to ship you panels and we put it up and so on, versus when we do thousands of panels in one spot. So even in that most expensive way, if you take the price of the panel and divide through by its lifetime, you end up with water that's about 10 cents a liter. So it's about 5 cents per standard 16-ounce bottle of water if you want. So that's about anywhere from 5 to 10 times cheaper than bottled water, and about the same cost as if you have RO at your sink, if you're replacing the filters regularly, which many people don't do. And so, sort of on par with that RO water and way cheaper than bottled water. And what you know in both those cases, that you're not wasting water down the drain, which you do with RO. You're not wasting that plastic, and that water is healthy. And then through your Source app, you can see directly, okay, I produced this much water, this is how much water I have in storage. And when something like this happens, like the pandemic or just any hurricane or whatever else, everybody knows what the picture is on the news, right? It's like, oh, here's the store shelves where the bottled water used to be, right? It's like, ooh, scary. But with Source, you don't have to think about that. You have your own supply of drinking water anywhere on the planet. So that's that side. Now let's go to like the emerging market condition. The best way to articulate this is think about somebody who is currently fetching water. Let's take a young woman, let's say a 20-year-old woman who has a couple kids, and she currently walks 5 kilometers for water, which would be on the low end of the average of the distance people walk for water in India, of which about 800 million people do. Okay, so a lot. So imagine now that 5 kilometers, you do the math on that. It turns out that if we assume that her time is worth more than 9 cents per hour as a pay rate, think about that as a salary rate. If you assume her value of time is greater than 9 cents per hour, it makes sense to put Source in. I would imagine that every human on the planet has productivity that is greater, I'm just guessing, than 9 cents per hour, right? And I would imagine that it's actually many, 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 many times that, right? No matter who they are, where they are, and what economy they are in. And so in both of those cases, the very top end to the most modest end, it makes sense today to own Source.
So I've got a great question from Alethea. I'm going to unmute her here in a second. We have a big frame picture in our office that says, those in the middle of doing something, those who say something is impossible should not be so rude as to interrupt the person in the process of doing it. So Alethea, what's your question?
Nice.
Hey, nice to meet you, Cody. My question is, so what was your thought process and also your action process whenever, I'm sure a lot of people probably came to you to say, like, this is impossible, your plan is impossible. But what did you do whenever those voices came about, and how did you combat against that?
Yeah, so I would say people still tell me that, right? And for sure, when we were first starting out, people just sort of, kind of push it off. But when people go from skepticism to cynicism to then they taste the water and it's like, okay, this is magic, then I know that I've won them over. I think, sort of going back to the fundamentals, right? Like, this is a really, really big problem without a solution. The back of the napkin says that a solution should pencil out. And so therefore, if this is true, then this thing can solve that thing, and therefore I'm right. If this isn't true, then I'm wrong, but who else is going to do it, right? And so it sort of just came down to this idea that the problem is so massive that even if I was just a little bit right, it made sense to attack it. So sometimes when we set our sights really, really, like, it's sort of like, if you set your sights really low, then it's easy to overcome. If you set your sights really, really high, then you don't have to be that right for it to matter. it's kind of in the middle where you're kind of middling, where it really matters how right you are. And so this is one of those ones where it's like, okay, a global problem where, you know, billions of people don't have good drinking water. It's worth it. It's worth taking the risk.
I've already got, I think, 4 or 5 questions about when can we start selling this product, but Cody and I have been trying to figure that out for a while. We're going to have to keep exploring that. Daniel Mason has got a question. So Daniel, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, yes, Cody. Thank you so much for your time today. Just got a question. So like when you're in like a heavy populated area like China, where pollution is like really bad there, how does your product like overcome that to make it safe to drink the water there?
Absolutely. First of all, did you paint that picture behind you?
I did actually.
Hold it up. That's awesome. Can you hold it up?
Let's see it.
Sure.
I'll say something so it'll spotlight you, Daniel.
Pretty
Daniel,
cool.
can you talk for a second? Oh, wait, hold on. I may have muted him. Hold on.
What happened?
There we go. Sorry. Say you talk for a minute because it'll highlight your video and then hold it up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yes, I painted this. Absolutely.
That's really good.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
I
actually
like
the first one. Actually, the first one I ever painted.
I'm impressed, man.
Very good. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, so good question. Your question, just to remind everybody, was about how air pollution affects water quality with source. So I mentioned earlier, the way that source works is through this adsorption, desorption, and the condensation process. So it's almost like distilling water. So from a fundamentals perspective, we should end up with water that's far, far cleaner than the air that it came out of. And then of course, okay, is that true or not, right? So we're installed today in Mumbai, Mexico City, Cape Town, Jakarta, Manila, you know, a lot of places where you can see the lack of air quality, right? You can literally see it. And then we've done water quality testing in all of those places, many, many more, and shown that in fact, we do not pull pollutants into the water. And so both from a theory perspective and from a practice perspective, the water comes out of those environments clean. And that's actually a really critical question, really super important part of how source works. Is it doesn't matter, even if you're, let's say in Atlanta, right, during certain seasons, there's all kinds of stuff in the air that you really don't want to pull into the water. And so that's a critical thing for us.
So
thank you.
You've got check your chat too, because you're about to get a question from someone you haven't seen in a while. So I'm gonna pop this guy up because he actually got on to learn today.
Cody.
Oh my God, there he is. There he
Hey
is.
guys, I saw Cody, I think at Arizona State University last time. I don't know, have we ever seen each other since school?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, at least once. What was obviously for Adam's wedding?
Yes.
What else? Maybe that was it. How you been, man?
Man, I'm great. I watched a couple of your videos getting ready for this, and seriously, I'm almost emotional watching you speak and seeing, you know, really where you've taken this thing, because I know a lot of the people on this call, and I've been on almost every single call, and I've watched all but one of the calls that Adam's done, and you bring a very unique perspective, because so many people, it's really interesting to watch these questions about the actual product, to watch these questions about where you actually came from with it. I think these are ingenious, and the question I'm going to ask is so on another place from that, but congratulations to you. I just watching the work, and rarely do people get to make a real impact on the planet, on people, and do pretty well financially from what I understand. So, and yes, I'll be getting on your website and buying one of these. I probably need 2 for my house because I know here. But I think it's just amazing. I'm watching your videos, how you articulate your thought process. So enough blowing smoke up your ass. We know each other too long. But for all you people, yeah, as Adam said, I'm on here to learn. I read something yesterday that just said, you know, you can sit around on whatever we've achieved, or you can go find something you don't know about and learn about it. And the minute Adam announced this, and I've known Cody for 30 years, whatever it is, 20 years, I went and clicked on one of the things you showed, Adam, and I was just stared at it, just listening. I knew the concept. I talked to Adam about it. Blew me away. So listen to you talk's fun. So this is not an easy business you're in, and you've had a lot of doubt built around you all this time. I am quite sure that every single experiment you did was not successful. I don't even need to ask that question. We're all going through a very interesting opportunity right now, a chance to really take a look at things and slow it down for a moment and pause. And then this is where I truly believe creation comes from. Weird as can be, I'm in 3 startups right now. Adam's like, what are you doing? But this is when opportunities create themselves, is right now. But you running full speed, I know what traveling like you travel is like. What do you do spiritually, educationally, mentally, to give yourself the space and the centered ground to, remember you have a family, hell, remember you have a body at the rate that your mind runs. What do you do? Do you have some routines? Do you have some things you could share with these guys? Because you talk about these things all the time, and I'd love to know what you do to calm that mind of yours down.
Yeah, Larry, coming from you, deep respect for all things you've done, and just really, really good to see you and hear those words. So I appreciate it. So I guess a few things. So first, this company has a really weird name, Zero Mass. What the hell is that all about, right? And fundamentally, where that comes from is the idea that when you start something, the one thing you know is that you're wrong. You have an initial idea, but you know that it's wrong. And so how do you remain entirely data-driven and have no inertia on path? So when that next data point comes, you can turn the corner with no momentum loss and never look back. Minimize traditions, maximize the ability to shift direction. Some people sort of think about the term pivot as a pejorative. I say if you haven't pivoted by 9 a.m. every day, somebody's eating your lunch. This idea.
I don't know if anybody's ever been in a meeting with me, they've heard pivot every single time. Yeah. And that is so amazing. I've never heard anybody say 9 o'clock. I usually about 11 before my first real pivot, but that's pretty incredible.
So the idea that and this sounds just like a broad cultural concept, but also from the point of view of mental health and spirits high and thinking about how to build a company at any given moment is, and not just during this period, but the idea that the world's always shifting and moving, and it's not like, I started this thing 5 years ago, therefore the answer is the same as 5 years ago. The answer isn't the same as it was this morning. And so, how do we keep on that light of footing? And so that when, global pandemic happens and all these things are shifting, it's like, okay, well, the data is shifting. Here's what it says that we need to do today, right? And so that also helps to remove this sort of egoistic aspect of like, okay, I'm a smart guy, got this thing figured out, blah, blah, blah. No. You don't know shit, right? Another one that's sort of critical in that from a cultural perspective is we have this one cultural element that says, demand yes if, reject no because. Hey, Larry, I got this great idea. It's and you say, nah, because that's going to cost $3 million and it's going to take a really long time. And it's a shitty idea. Dead on door now. Okay. Yes, if we had $3 million more and you got in a car and drove to Nogales and picked up those parts, and we did this. Okay, now we know the framework in which that idea works, right? It's a forced engagement concept. So that's actually one that enables the team to sort of always be on a footing of finding the solution to the question that's being asked, as opposed to never rejecting it.
Yeah, that Adam is a lot like your and rather than or. Yeah, it's it's a lot. That's a lot of that, and I find that really, really interesting because it's almost like in the car business, it's never no, we can't sell you that car and finance it. It's look, Cody, your credit's really not very good, and unfortunately, that's not the great news. But the good news is we can do this. You need $37,422 down, and we're going to finance $1,000.
Yeah. That's the yes if, right? And it doesn't mean they end up going forward, but that's the yes if, exactly. So, and then I'll just share one more cultural element because I'm sort of a culture junkie. Our very first culture element is lead with love. And what does that mean? Especially when you're talking to scientists, engineers, and whatnot, people that are uncomfortable with maybe love in their personal life, much less, in their professional life. So we kind of break it down in two ways. One is what I call the triad of love, which is courage, vulnerability, and love. Why is it courageous to run into a burning building? It is courageous to run into a burning building because you're vulnerable of being burned. Why would you do that? Well, there's something inside that you love. And I would argue that anything that's worth doing, there's always that triad. If you can't find the triad, why are you doing it? What is courageous about what you're going to go do? What do you love on the other side of that thing that's causing you to do it? And if you've got those two, you're vulnerable of failing in ways that are small and big, and just own that, because the love piece of that on the other side is what makes it worth it. The other piece of the lead with love concept, there's that triad. The other one is, and I love that father-son's on here because this is going to resonate with you guys, is this idea of meeting chaos with calm. So the way I normally analogize this is, imagine the first time that Adam was trying to learn to drive a manual transmission car. And imagine that, Larry, you're sitting in the passenger seat and say, okay, son, push in the clutch, take out a gear, start the car. All right, put it in first. All right, now bring up the RPMs. And the RPMs are going like this because you don't have the muscle memory yet. And you start to let out the clutch. All of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. The car dies. And you say, all right, push back in the clutch. Take out. And meanwhile, the person in the driver's seat's going like this, shaking, adrenaline's up, right? And eventually you get the car going, and then eventually get into second gear. And what's happening there? You've got somebody who's in chaos and somebody who's in calm. Every given moment, every single person you interact with, that person is either in that chaos position or in that calm position, and it switches back and forth. And if you don't know which one you're in trouble. So meet chaos with calm is intrinsically a loving act. One, and two, the triad of love, right? Courage, vulnerability, love. So that right there underpins how you get to love as a verb, and sort of solidifying at the very foundation of what you're trying to do, whether it's a business or a relationship or a hobby or whatever it is, or an interaction with a child, how you approach that situation at any given moment.
So I'm not gonna let you off the hook this easy. You okay with me keeping going a little bit, Adam? Because I'm
Yeah, we've got about, yeah, for sure. I've got a couple more things to ask.
okay. I'll go real quick on you. So I'm gonna look. I just wrote down an entire freaking page of notes. Thank you very much.
I'll send you the write-up on that, Larry.
I'm gonna steal all your shit, and you'll see it on sharetolearning.com within a week.
All right.
You will be acknowledged on there. But so I'm listening to that, and it's really interesting that the meeting chaos with calm. So here's the question: how do you do that when you're by yourself and the chaos is you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that I'm not perfect on that front by a long stretch. And usually the issue is that I have too many things in my mind. I'm sort of trying to wrestle with a lot of different variables at once. I have coping mechanisms, like I'm a runner, so I exercise, try to get that the endorphins going and so on. If I don't exercise, it's very difficult for me to manage the psychology of all the things that are going on at once. The other sort of a mindfulness exercise is probably the other mechanism by which I sort of say, look, it kind of comes back to that cultural element again of what I know is that whatever my beliefs are at this moment, they're wrong. Whatever I believe to be true, whatever I think is what I should be doing and so on, it's wrong. And so therefore I can just kind of let it go and just take that next data point. So if something's not going right, it's, well, what is it about my assumptions that are wrong? And so it's sort of this, it kind of removes the ego of, God damn it, I was wrong. How do I fix it? It's like, well, no, I'm wrong. Let's sort through how do we get to the right answer. So maybe, I think those are probably the two biggest mechanisms I've got.
Yeah, one of the guys that was on the hydrogen bomb said that when he realized that the wider or the bigger his island of knowledge got, that the broader the shore of nothing he knew continued to grow as well.
Yeah, I think that was Oppenheimer, Larry.
What?
I think that was Oppenheimer.
Okay, I don't remember who. It's somebody who was on the hydrogen bomb. That I read recently. I don't remember names very well. So, but I just thought the concept of think of the shoreline getting bigger and bigger, because every time you run into what you do know, you learn something new, and I think it all boils down to this: you just put your ego in your pocket and let the world be bigger than you and realize that you can't be right every time. So congratulations on everything you've done. Thanks for doing this. I've had a ball. Keep going. Go ahead, Ed.
Thanks, Larry. Nice to see you, man.
My
Thanks.
pleasure, man.
I'm gonna share a picture. Talk to me about what I'm seeing in this picture.
This last summer, I probably had one of the most humbling experiences of my life. I was awarded the Lemelson MIT Prize by MIT. It's awarded to one inventor per year for invention. So it's basically like a mini, whatever, not a Nobel Prize, but like a mini version of that. It's US based, but sort of MIT gives this Lemelson MIT Prize. $500,000, and we were going to go do the ceremony at MIT, and I asked who they were going to have introduce it and whatnot. And I happened to know Madeleine Albright, Secretary Madeleine Albright, from my Clinton Global Initiative days. And so I called her up and I said, hey, would you come up and be a part of the ceremony thing? She couldn't do the day that MIT was going to do this thing. And so another buddy of mine sits on the board of the JFK Library in Boston. And so the day before the actual award, we did a fireside or seaside chat at the JFK Library in Boston with Madeleine Albright. I gave her that that brooch, which is, if you guys follow her, she's a big brooch person. I gave her the sort of a Jackie Kennedy reproduction of a sun to represent, renewable energy. That's source bottled water right there on the bottle, in the wine bottle there on the table. And we had this beautiful chat. You can look it up on YouTube. She's hilarious and also just a phenomenal human being. I think she's 83 now or 84. And she tells stories about, I asked her, for example, when something like, when were you wrong, right? Or when did you screw up? And, she told a story and I said, no, really, when, and so she talked to us about telling, the generals that they needed to go in and solve this genocide that was happening in Serbia in the 90s, for those of you that are old enough to remember that. And the generals told her no. And she says, one of the problems with being Secretary of State is you don't have any airplanes, right? So you have to get them behind you. And so then she went to President Clinton and convinced him. And so then they went ahead and struck Serbia, if you guys remember that, because they were killing the Kosovo folks. And that night when they bombed, the first night, they hit the Chinese embassy and killed a bunch of people. At that moment, it was known as Madeleine's War, and before it was sorted out. So you think about somebody who has the character to have lived a life where she made decisions where people died, and she made decisions where people died that were unintentionally killed, and not a small number of people. And yet she's able to talk about it in the context of the good that she did and the good that we as a country did. It's sort of like the unmeasurable level of leadership. It doesn't matter whether I agree with any position she took. I don't necessarily agree with all of her decisions, but that's irrelevant. You think about like the guilt that you have about that time you wronged that one person, or you think about the guilt you have about things that didn't work out. And then you speak to somebody who is a true leader, who's lived a phenomenal life, and she's able to be conversant about those failures that were public at a global level in the context of the good that she did. It's pretty.
We can't get in out of our own heads about some tiny little thing we did, and there's people who spend their entire lives trying to make up for one small wrong decision. And this is somebody who has been able to take a step back and frame it in a way that's pretty cool. So you've gotten some great support from obviously from her. Some of the photos you sent me were pretty cool. Obviously you with Bill Clinton when you were on the initiative. We've got some with Ted Danson here. Got some with Han Solo, clearly. Indiana Jones, whichever franchise you prefer. I'm an Indiana Jones guy myself. Talk to me about these couple of pictures we've got here.
So go back one. I want to see who on this call knows who that is.
I'm scrolling. I got a couple of head nods and some shakes.
It's Lupe Fiasco for anybody who's a hip hop fan. Multi-Grammy award-winning hip hop guy. So anyway, he's awesome. Very good friend of mine now. He's actually done multiple installs around the globe. He did a keynote for us for our launch in Philippines and so on. Really fantastic mind. One of the best sort of creators of metaphor that I've ever met in my life.
And here we go.
It's Malala Yousafzai. That's a year after she was shot in the head for going to school. Everybody knows that guy.
Now, there's a couple more that are like the truly famous pictures. So I've got to share these. But like of the people, like I mean, I know Kanye is kind of a big deal, but like that is a big
Hey, nice. That's amazing.
That's the big deal. So hold on, let's see. We've got a couple of these here. I've got some photos from back in the day that I thought were pretty funny, and they're all appropriate. So this is we talked about our awesome apartment. There's apartment 37 right there on the day I was moving out, I think. And then these guys, most of the guys have gotten to know my family over time, and I looked back through some of the old pictures, and we did have our favorite roommate we ever had was a bearded dragon named Puff. And so here's one of you with Laura with our famous whiteboard with holding the reptile.
Also, it looks like I have a bandage on my forehead, which is fantastic.
You do, but I actually remember you had gone. I think you had gone shooting at some point with your dad, and you caught a scope between the eyes.
I've gone hunting, and I got the scope in the forehead because I got a little excited about the elk that I was shooting at, so I got a little too close to the scope.
Pretty funny. So I've gotten a bunch of.
That was a famous whiteboard behind there too, right?
That was a famous whiteboard too. I've gotten a bunch of questions about Flint, Michigan. Do you have any insight?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, Flint is probably one of the most well-known water challenges in the country. As everybody knows, it's one of many dozens of cities that have the exact same issue. There's over 1.5 million miles of lead pipes still in the ground. Most of that are in buildings. Most of that's in buildings. And all that happened in Flint was a small pH change. It wasn't like some big failure of like a chemical spill or anything. Just a pH change from one water supply to another caused the lead oxide inside the pipes, which protects the lead from dissolving in, caused the lead oxide to dissolve. And, that's an ongoing issue. We should not, I think one of the failings in our society is that we sort of get focused around Flint. It's like, oh yeah, Flint, like the other, like, oh, right there, that little encapsulated thing. Think about in Georgia, all of those towns that are a little bit further off, all those areas that are underserved areas inside the cities that have old infrastructure that's aging, leaking, possibly variable potability and so on. And that's only the kind of on the sustaining life side of things, in addition to whether or not you actually want to drink it, right? How much sulfur is in the water if you're drinking out of a well and so on.
So vision for zero mass water, 5 years.
So we can never be accused of having a small vision. Our vision is to perfect water for every person, every place. If you remember, Google's from like 2000, I think it's something like to organize the world's information, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, good luck, guys, right? And then they go do it. So the question is, do we have the technology entitlement to that vision? And I can say right now, we do. So now it's all about only, in quotes, the big only, execution, right? And so for us, it's all about how do we continue to advance the cost performance, basically the amount of water output per the amount of cost it takes to build the unit, right? How do we continue to advance that in a way that keeps driving us on, probably most people heard of Moore's law, sort of the exponential rate of learning that you have in microelectronics. That has happened in solar panels now. That's happened in cell phones and in communications and so on. So how do we continue on our Moore's law for source so that at some point in the not too distant future, not 10 years, on the order of 5 years, that we're at a cost structure that makes it an obvious choice independent of where you're at in economic spectrum. So that's our focus. technology entitlements there. Now we've got to get that cost performance to a point where it's ubiquity.
Words of wisdom to close us out from one of my oldest friends. We've got a lot of young entrepreneurs right now, a lot of people who are building businesses, a lot of people who are watching where we're not able to work right now, and they've been locking themselves down, they've been learning, they've been studying, and everybody's preparing for how do we pounce when we're able to start working. So ideas and advice as closing words from somebody who's built successful businesses and is working to change the world.
Oh, geez. I would say, I guess a few things. This is heavy air quotes, okay? Take this one-time gift of COVID to position yourself as a position of strength relative to the world for when we get back, right? In other words, if you're doing something that's worthwhile, which is why you're doing it, this period of time is nothing but a pause on your trajectory. You can take this pause and sort of do nothing with it and say, well, everybody's going to just be slid to the right. Well, remember, it's not you being slid to the right in terms of time. The world is shifting to the right. And so what are you going to do so that on the other side of that, when the world shifted to the right, you're slightly positioned to the right of that? I think that's ultimately what you should focus on. And if you do that, when the economy starts to come back and so on, you've been thinking about what that world's going to look like on the other end, and never forget that you're wrong.
Love it. Yeah, we've been talking a lot about, for those of us who are fortunate enough to be healthy, we have two choices of how we look at this. It's either a cocoon or a coffin, right? Yeah. So I think that sums it up beautifully. All right, so guys, I've got 0 minutes left. So we have a tradition here, Cody. We are going to unmute every single person on this call. We have about 240 people on here, and we're going to give you a little round of applause. Thank you so much for your time. I know a lot of what you got going on right now, and you are super busy. So let's get Cody some love.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cody.
Hey, Cody.